The blade came out of nowhere, a thin stiletto, pressed flat against the side of Reuben Reed's throat before he had even registered the shape moving behind him in the alley mouth. He went very still. In 6 months of guarding the Thornpass Monastery market, he had learned that stillness was the first gift you gave yourself when something sharp touched your neck. His hand hovered near the short sword at his hip, but did not reach for it. His lantern swung in the wind that howled down from the Grayville peaks, casting jumping shadows across the market's narrow back alleys, and he made himself breathe through his nose. "Coin purse," said a low voice. "Male. Drunk, maybe." "You're making a mistake," Reuben said. "Coin purse and the sword." Reuben exhaled. His coin purse contained 14 copper marks, his weekly wages from Captain Aldous Varn of the Monastery Market Guard. The sword was borrowed from the garrison stores. Neither was worth his life, and he was about to begin the careful process of surrendering them when the figure holding the blade against his throat made a small, startled sound, and then his attacker was simply gone. Not gone in the way that a man steps back. Gone in the way that a man gets plucked. Reuben spun. He saw the mugger dangling a foot off the alley floor, held one-handed by the scruff of his coat, his heels kicking against air. And holding him, as casually as a woman might hold a chicken by the feet at a market stall, was the largest, most remarkable person Reuben Reed had ever laid eyes on in his 24 years of living. She was an orc, and she was not dressed for the cold the way the other traders who came through Thornpass dressed. She wore fitted traveler's leathers the color of deep cedar bark, a laced bodice that shaped itself to a figure that was broad-shouldered and powerful and unmistakably, emphatically feminine, and tucked into her belt was a long hunting knife with an antler handle. Her skin was the deep weathered green of oak moss after rain. Her hair was black and thick and braided back in a single heavy rope that hung over one shoulder. Her tusks curved up from her lower jaw like two pale crescent moons-long tusks, longer than any Reuben had seen on the few orcs who passed through the market, and her eyes, when they cut from the dangling mugger to Reuben, were a shade of amber that caught the lantern light and burned with it. She tilted her head. She was watching him, not the man she was holding. She dropped the mugger. He landed badly, scrambled upright, and ran. His footsteps clattered away between the market stalls and were gone. She watched Reuben the entire time. "You are the night watch," she said. It was not a question. "I am," Reuben said. He straightened his coat, then felt immediately foolish for straightening his coat. "One of them, Reuben Reed." He hesitated, then added, "Thank you." She looked at him for a long moment. She seemed to be deciding something about him, some private accounting that only she could see the ledger of. Then she said, "Sheriff Grimtusk," and walked past him, back toward the market's torchlit main street, as though saving a guardsman's life was a thing that happened to her on most evenings. Reuben stood in the dark of the alley holding his lantern, watching her go, and told himself that his heart was hammering because of the knife. He told himself that until he almost believed it. He saw her again the next morning. Thornpass Monastery Market sat at the crown of the Grayville Pass, 1,000 feet above the lowland river valley to the south, and another 1,000 below the permanent snowline to the north. It had begun as a trade-way station for the old monks of the Grayville Order, who had built their monastery into the south face of the highest peak 400 years ago. The monks were mostly gone now, dispersed by plague and politics 2 generations back, but the market had survived them. It occupied the broad stone courtyard of the old monastery complex and spilled out into a half-ring of timber and stone stalls along the cobbled road that climbed through the pass. In winter, the road was the only reliable route through the range, which made Thornpass the bottleneck through which all the northern trade flowed. That meant money, and money meant trouble, and trouble was why the garrison existed. Reuben had joined the garrison 6 months ago at the recommendation of a militia captain in the river town of Caldford, who had written that Reed was honest, reliable, and harder to rattle than the situation usually warranted. He was not wrong about any of those things, though the pay at Thornpass was modest and the barracks were cold, and Captain Varn was a sour man who had been passed over for a promotion he felt he deserved, which made him hard to please and easy to anger. Sheriff Grimtusk was at the spice trader's stall when Reuben came off his shift change, carrying 2 ration biscuits and a clay cup of barley tea, and intending to sit on the low wall by the monastery's old well and eat in peace. She was examining a jar of ground black pepper, holding it up to the morning light that cut in low and gray from the eastern peaks, and the cedar leather of her bodice, and the heavy braid of her hair, and the proud line of her profile, all caught that light in a way that made the scene look as though someone had composed it deliberately. Reuben sat on his wall and told himself not to stare. He stared. She set the pepper jar down without buying it and turned, and her amber eyes found him immediately, as if she had known exactly where he was the whole time. He looked away. Then he looked back, because he was 24 and had no talent for deception, and she was looking at him with the same evaluating expression she had used the night before, and something about being weighed and measured by someone who moved through the world with that kind of absolute authority made his pulse do something inconvenient. She walked to him. She sat on the wall beside him, leaving a foot of stone between them, which in the mountain wind felt like no distance at all. "You did not draw your sword," she said. "I was going to give him my coin purse." "That is not what I meant," he thought about it, "when you came up behind him. Most men in your position would have drawn while I was holding him to establish themselves." Reuben looked down at his barley tea. He wasn't a threat anymore. Drawing a sword on a man who's already neutralized seems like bad sense. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Why are you here? You are not from a mountain town. Your boots are valley-made." He blinked. He looked down at his boots, which were indeed valley-made, solid but uninsulated, and already showing the strain of a Grayville winter. "Caldford south of here on the Wren River." "I know Caldford. Came up for the garrison post. The pay is better than town watch in the valley." He paused. "Not by much, but better." She said nothing, and the silence was not uncomfortable, which surprised him. Most silences with strangers were uncomfortable. This one felt like the kind of silence that occurs between 2 people who are both paying attention to the same thing. "What brings you to Thornpass?" he asked. She turned to look at him, and the morning light caught her tusks, and he realized with a small shock that he was not afraid of them. He had expected to be. Every story he had ever heard about orcs as a boy in Caldford had leaned hard on the tusks, the size, the danger. He had been told by his mother, kindly, that orcs were creatures to be respected at a careful distance. He had been told by his uncle, less kindly, things he preferred not to remember. He had come to Thornpass with those stories still rattling around in the back of his head, and he had expected on seeing her in that alley to feel the fear those stories had planted. He had not felt it. He did not feel it now. "I am a trader," she said. "Mountain herbs, Grayville ginseng root mostly. The lowland apothecaries pay well for it." She paused. "I have had a license for the market for 3 years. I only arrived 6 months ago." "I know. I have not seen you before." Her eyes stayed on his face, frank and direct and unafraid of looking, in the way that orcs were said to be. It was considered rude among humans to hold a stare that long. He found he did not mind. "You should get better boots," she said, and stood and went back to the spice stall. He looked at his boots. He looked at the space on the wall where she had been sitting. He finished his barley tea. He did not tell anyone about the alley. He was not sure, for the first few days, whether that was because reporting it would require him to explain that an orc woman had rescued him, and he did not want to deal with the looks he would receive, or because the rescue felt somehow private, a thing that belonged between the 2 of them and did not need to be handed over to official record-keeping. He decided it was the second reason, and he understood that this decision said something about him that he did not fully know what to do with. Over the following 2 weeks, a pattern assembled itself without either of them seeming to plan it. He came off his morning shift change and sat on the well wall with his barley tea, and she was often at the eastern stalls at that hour, and they talked. Never for very long, never about anything that would sound significant recounted to someone else afterward. He told her about Caldford, about the river and the way the flat winter fogs rolled in off the Wren and made the whole valley disappear, about his father's trade as a cobbler, about his two sisters who had both married farmers and lived comfortable, settled lives that he had always admired and never quite wanted for himself. She told him about the Grimtusk clan range, high in the northern reaches of the Greyvilles, about ginseng harvesting, which was meticulous and slow work requiring exact knowledge of which roots were mature and which were still growing, about a grandmother who had taught her every mountain trail above the snowline before she was fully grown. He never asked about the tusks. He had noticed that she watched him when she thought he was not watching her, which he always was, and that she was waiting for something, some flinch or careful piece of politeness that would tell her he was afraid of her or disgusted by her or merely tolerating her. He refused to give it to her because he was not afraid or disgusted or tolerating anything. He was interested, deeply and unambiguously interested, in every word she said. On the 17th day of this pattern, she sat beside him on the wall closer than before, close enough that the warmth of her arm was a constant on his left side in the cold air, and said, without preamble, "There is a man watching me." Reuben looked up from his tea. "Watching you how? The way men watch things they mean to remove." She was not looking at the man. She was looking at the middle distance with steady amber eyes, and she had her hands loose in her lap, and he could see she was the kind of person who stayed very still when she was alert and ready. "He has been in the market for 4 days. He looks at my license board each morning before I open my stall." "Do you know him?" "I know the family crest on his coat." "It belongs to the household of Aldrich Voss." Reuben set down his cup. "Governor Voss's son. He's been in Thorn Pass. You know who he is?" "I know the name. Aldrich Voss is the late governor's eldest." "There's a dispute about the Thorn Pass charter rights who holds the taxing authority over the pass." He paused, putting it together. "If Voss wants to control the market, he needs to control who has licenses." She turned to look at him then, and he saw in her expression that she had already worked this out and had simply been waiting to see whether he would reach it on his own. He had the feeling of being tested, and also the feeling that he had passed, which he found he cared about significantly. "There are 7 orc traders with licenses in this market," she said. "We have held them longer than any of the human traders. We pay our fees on time. The licenses are sound." She held his gaze. "Sound licenses cannot be revoked without cause, so cause will need to be found, or made." "Who is Captain Varn loyal to?" Her silence said everything. Reuben thought about Captain Varn, who was sour and passed over and desperate for a patron who might correct that. He thought about Aldrich Voss, who was the kind of man born knowing that his name was a key that opened doors. He thought about Sharamph, who had earned her place in this market route by route over 3 years and could have it stripped away by politics she had no hand in. "I will watch the man," he said. She looked at him carefully. "You are a junior guardsman." "Yes. This will not make Varn like you." "Varn doesn't like me anyway." He picked his cup back up. "He doesn't like anyone who doesn't tell him he should have been promoted." The corner of her mouth moved. It was the first time he had seen her come close to smiling, and it did something immediate and significant to the temperature of the air around him. "Why are you willing to do this?" He met her eyes. "Because it is right," he said, "and because you helped me." She looked at him for a long moment. "Those are not the same reason," she said quietly. He did not answer, because she was right and they both knew it, and saying so out loud would have changed the comfortable quality of their mornings in some way neither of them seemed ready for. The man watching Sharamph was named Derswick. He was one of Aldrich Voss's household men, not a soldier, not exactly, but the kind of man a powerful family kept on retainer for tasks that required neither honor nor scruple. Reuben spent 3 days on his own time cataloging the man's movements through the market, noting which stalls he visited, which traders he spoke to, how long he spent at each orc-held license board. He wrote it all in the small leather notebook he kept in his breast pocket, the one his father had given him when he left for Thorn Pass, which had previously contained nothing more significant than patrol timetables and vendor dispute records. He told Sheriff everything he found on the well wall in the mornings. She listened without interrupting. She asked precise, useful questions. She had a mind that moved fast under that composed exterior, that took information and organized it efficiently, and he found the experience of thinking alongside her to be unlike any intellectual partnership he had previously encountered, not because she was an orc, but because she was thorough and sharp and took his observations seriously without flattering him about them. "He is building a dossier," she said on the fourth morning. "On each of the 7 of us. He needs infractions. If he cannot find them, he will invent them. The other 6 traders, do they know? I have told them. 2 are already considering leaving before the season ends. If they go, it weakens all of us. The licenses become easier to challenge if half the holders abandon them." Reuben thought about this. "Has anyone gone to the market's governance board? The old monastery charter still technically supersedes any Voss claim. The Grayville Pass falls under the regional covenant of the governance board has not met since autumn. Governor Voss, the old one, the legitimate one, was its chair. His death left the seat empty." She paused. "Aldrich is positioning himself as the chair's inheritor." "But he hasn't been confirmed yet." "No." "Then the old charter still holds, and the market is technically governed by the full board, which requires a meeting to make any binding decision about license revocations." She looked at him. He could feel the weight of it, the careful attention she brought to everything she turned those amber eyes on. "You know the charter. I read it when I arrived. Old habit. My father said you should always know the rules of the place you're standing." He shrugged slightly. "I did not expect it to be useful so quickly." This time she did smile. It was a slow thing, and it lifted the planes of her face and showed the full curve of her tusks, and it was nothing short of extraordinary. He realized he had been hoping to see it for weeks. "Then we need the governance board to convene," she said, "which requires 4 of the 7 board members to call for a meeting." "Who are they?" "I know 2 of them, traders, old market families. I know one, a monk, one of the few who stayed, Brother Kale. He lives in the north wing of the monastery." Reuben paused. "And the 4th? Alcourt, the grain factor. He owes me 2 favors from the autumn supply shortfall. He will come if I ask." Reuben looked at her. She looked at him. The morning wind came screaming down from the peaks and rattled the shutter boards of the nearby stalls, and neither of them moved. "Then we should ask," he said. "We," she repeated. "Is that a problem?" She studied him for a moment, and there was something in her eyes he had not seen there before, something less certain than her usual composure, something that looked, very briefly, like it might be wondering about him in a way that went further than professional assessment. Then it settled back into steadiness. "No," she said quietly, "it is not a problem." They spent the next week moving through the markets separately, each approaching the board members in ways that would not alert Derswick or Varn to what was being assembled. Reuben visited Brother Kale on the pretext of a patrol route check, and left with a firm commitment and a cup of exceedingly good monastery tea. Sheriff handled Alcourt, the grain factor, in a single conversation that Reuben was not present for, but which evidently went well, because she reported it the next morning with a calm efficiency that concealed what he was starting to recognize as satisfaction. What grew between them in those 7 days was a different thing from what had already been there. The mornings on the wall had been easy and warm, the kind of ease that comes when 2 people are simply comfortable with each other. This was warmer than that, and less easy, charged with the specific voltage of 2 people working toward a shared goal and finding, at close quarters, that they not only thought alike, but relied on each other in a way that was increasingly difficult to describe as mere convenience. He noticed the way she moved. He noticed it the way you notice something you are trying not to notice and keep noticing anyway. She moved through the market with a deliberate, unhurried confidence, and people stepped aside without seeming to know why, and she navigated the narrow stall alleys with an ease that made her size feel like a gift rather than an obstacle. She was 26. She had told him 2 years older than him, raised in the high peaks above where the human settlements thinned out, and she wore the mountain in her bones. She knew cold and altitude, and the patience required to harvest something that grew at its own pace, regardless of what you wanted from it. He noticed, because he had begun noticing everything, that she sometimes rubbed the pad of her thumb against the antler handle of her belt knife when she was thinking. He noticed that when she was amused, the amusement showed first in her eyes, a warm brightness, before it reached her expression. He noticed that she took her tea with nothing in it, no honey, no spice, and drank it while it was still too hot, the way people do when they grew up without excess and do not see the point of waiting. He noticed all of this and said nothing about any of it and thought about it constantly when he was on patrol and supposed to be thinking about other things. On the 8th evening, the governance board meeting was called. The monastery's old convening hall, a vaulted stone room in the eastern wing, heated by 2 large iron braziers and lit by a dozen hanging lanterns, held 7 people around a wide table. 4 board members, Sheriff, Reuben, and Brother Cale's assistant as record keeper. The meeting was simple and direct. The charter was read. The license structure was affirmed. The mechanism for any revocation proceedings was clarified. Revocation required a formal complaint with documented evidence, presented to the full board in session, with the license holder present to respond. No revocation could be made unilaterally by any individual claiming market authority, including any future chair, until the chairship was formally confirmed. It took less than 2 hours. When they filed out into the cold night courtyard, Reuben could see his breath, and the lanterns over the market stalls were swaying in the wind like slow pendulums, and Sheriff walked beside him without choosing to, the way people walk beside each other when the walking itself has become a habit. "That will slow them down," she said. "It will stop Derswick from moving on the licenses quietly. Now he needs a documented complaint and a board hearing to do anything. Aldrich Voss will not take that lying down." "No," Reuben agreed, "he won't." They stood in the courtyard. The other board members had dispersed into the dark. The lanterns swayed. Somewhere up on the peaks, the wind was doing something that would be a serious storm by morning. "Reuben," she said, and the way she said his name was different from the way she had said it before, something in the vowels that was quieter and more careful, as if she was handling it. "Why did you help me with this?" He looked at her. She was watching him with that frank, direct gaze, and she deserved an honest answer. She had always deserved his honesty and had always received it, and this was not a moment to change that. "Because I wanted to," he said. "Because watching someone work to strip something from you that you earned and deserve made me angry, and because he started again. Because I wanted to be useful to you, not just that night in the alley. I wanted to keep being useful to you." The silence was the longest one they had sat inside together. "No one has said that to me before," she said finally. Quiet. Not sad, something more complicated than sad, the tone of someone recognizing something they had stopped believing existed. He didn't reach for her. It was not the right moment for reaching, and he understood it, and he stood in the cold night and looked at her and let the moment be what it was. "Your boots are still terrible," she said. He laughed. He had not laughed in the company of another person since arriving in Thornpass, and the ease of it surprised him. "I know. There is a cobbler on the market's south side. He has mountain stock. You looked for that." She did not deny it. She turned and walked toward the market quarter, and after a moment he walked beside her, and neither of them said anything else, and it was the best walk of his life. Aldrich Voss arrived at Thornpass personally, 2 weeks after the board meeting, on a morning when ice had formed over the monastery well, and the wind was coming down off the peaks in long, steady blades. He was 28, broad-faced and well-dressed, with the polished boot confidence of a man who had never needed to earn anything and did not understand that other people did. He arrived with 6 retinue guards, a private secretary, Derswick, and a written declaration claiming the chairship of the governance board by right of inheritance from his late father. The declaration was technically valid. That was the problem. Reuben read through it twice that evening in the guardroom, using the monastery charter as his reference, and his stomach stayed low because the inheritance clause was real, and Aldrich Voss had the documents to support it. The chairship gave him procedural authority over board sessions, including the ability to call emergency sittings with expedited timelines. He went to Sharamp's stall. She was closing up for the evening, rolling her ginseng root inventory in oiled cloth, and she did not look up when he arrived. "I know," she said. "I saw his declaration posted this afternoon. The inheritance claim is real. I know. As chair, he can call an emergency session with 3 days' notice instead of the standard 14. And he can set the agenda." She looked up. Her expression was composed, but her jaw was set in a way that told him she was angry, the controlled kind of angry that was far more dangerous than the kind that shouted. "He will manufacture the complaints himself, have Derswick file them." "Can Derswick file a complaint? He is not a licensed market member." She paused. He watched her work through it. "No," she said. "The charter specifies complaints from licensed market members only. So the complaint has to come from a trader. From someone he has already bought." She began rolling the ginseng root again, her hands moving steadily. "There are 3 or 4 traders in this market who owe Voss money from bad winter loans. He will use one of them. Then we need to find out which ones and approach them first." She looked at him, and there was something searching in it, not doubt about him, but something that seemed to be reconciling what she had expected the world to offer her against what was actually standing in front of her. "You are not going to stop," she said softly. "No," he said simply. She was quiet for a moment. The evening market sounds filtered in around them. The last vendors packing, the guardsmen on the evening shift calling out across the courtyard, a mule complaining about something in the animal pen. Then she reached across the trestle table, and her hand, large and warm and certain, wrapped around his wrist for one brief moment, not grasping, just settling there, a point of contact that lasted perhaps 3 seconds before she released him and went back to her rolling. He held very still. His wrist was warm for the rest of the night. They found their compromised trader. He was a wool merchant named Grath, an older human man who had taken 2 substantial loans from the Voss family account at punishing interest rates, and who, when Reuben sat with him alone in the trader's tavern over hot cider and no accusation, turned out to be terrified and exhausted and deeply ashamed of what he had been asked to do. He had not filed anything yet. He had been going back and forth for 5 days, unable to sleep. Reuben listened to him for a long time. He did not lecture him. He was not the kind of person who saw moral collapse as an opportunity for self-righteousness. At the end of the listening, he said, "Do you want a way out of this?" Grath said yes. What they arranged, with the help of Alcourt the grain factor and one of the other board members, a woman named Turris who kept a map-making stall and had strong opinions about the Voss family going back 2 generations, was a loan restructure handled quietly through the monastery's old community fund, which still existed on paper and had been revived for the purpose. Reuben, having found the activation clause buried in the charter's appendix at 2 in the morning on a night when he could not sleep for entirely unrelated reasons involving the memory of warm pressure on his wrist. The restructure removed Grath's debt to the Voss account. Without the debt, Aldrich Voss had no leverage over him. Without Grath, his complaint mechanism collapsed. Aldrich Voss called his emergency session anyway, presenting himself as the aggrieved chair being obstructed. He was elegant about it and persuasive, and he had the room, except that the board members, all 4 of them, were unimpressed, and the process held. And when he left the meeting, he was furious in a careful, controlled way that was more frightening than shouting would have been. 3 days after the failed session, Derswick came to Reuben's morning patrol route alone. He stood in the middle of the cobbled road through the market like a man who had rehearsed this, which he had. He told Reuben that his garrison contract renewal, which came up in 6 weeks, would be reviewed by the new market chair, since garrison funding fell under market authority, and that it would be unfortunate if the review found reasons to deny it. He said it with the smooth indirection of a man who had delivered this kind of message often enough to have refined the phrasing. Reuben listened. He said, "Thank you for being direct with me." Derswick blinked. He had expected something else. "I'll keep it in mind," Reuben said, and completed his patrol route. He did not tell Sheriff about the threat to his contract because he did not want her to feel responsible for it and because it would not change what he was going to do. What he did tell her was that Aldrich Voss was about to escalate because a man like that, denied through legitimate channels twice, does not go back to being patient. She agreed. She said, "He will go outside the charter next time." "Yes. He will come at us personally, at the stall." "Yes." She looked at him steadily. "At me," she corrected quietly. "If he can discredit me personally, cause a public incident, make me appear violent or dangerous, he would have grounds to revoke on the basis of market safety." "Yes." Paused. "You should not be seen with me until this is resolved. It compromises your position." He looked at her. She was watching him with that careful, frank honesty, and she was wrong, and he told her so. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," he said. "Being seen with me is not a risk to you, and you are not a risk to my position. Voss is a risk to my position, and I knew that before Derswick came to talk to me." The pause stretched out. "He threatened your contract," she said, not a question. He had underestimated how quickly she put things together. "Yes." Something moved through her expression, fast and fierce, and then banked down. "Reuben, I am staying where I am," he said. "You need to stop arguing about it." She stared at him. He could see the effort it took her to receive this, to accept that someone was planting his feet for her and meant it, not as a performance, not as something she would have to pay back later, but simply as a fact about where he stood. He could see that this was not a thing she was accustomed to, and he waited while she found the place in herself that could accept it. "You are very stubborn," she said finally. "Yes," he agreed. That evening, she was at his patrol's end point, when he came around the last corner of the market's east wing. She was leaning against the stone wall with her arms crossed and the lantern light making amber of everything around her, and she had brought him a cup of tea, good tea, not barley, something hot and spiced that smelled like the mountain herbs she traded in, and she held it out without preamble. He took it. He drank it. She watched him. "I want to tell you something," she said. "All right. When I was a trader in the lower valley markets before Thornpass, I was—" She stopped. "Start it again. There were men who were generous to me, who offered help. It always had a cost, not immediately, but eventually the accounting came." He was quiet. "I stopped accepting help," she said, 3 years ago. I came to Thornpass and I built what I have here myself, and I accepted nothing from anyone because the accounting always came." "I am not making an accounting," he said. "I know that," she said quietly. "That is what I wanted to tell you. I know it. I have been watching you for 3 months now, and I know it about you, and I wanted you to know that I know it." She paused. "Because it matters to me. You matter to me. More than is." She caught herself. The wind came down from the peaks. A shutter banged somewhere in the market. "More than is what?" he said softly. She looked at him, and something happened in the amber of her eyes. Some guard that had been very carefully maintained for a very long time letting go. Not all at once, but in the way a careful person lets go of something heavy, deliberately, consciously, choosing to set it down. "More than is sensible," she said, "given the situation." He stepped forward. One step, close enough that he had to tilt his head back slightly to hold her gaze, because she was taller than him, and he had stopped minding that approximately 4 days after meeting her. He raised his free hand, the one not holding the tea, and she watched it coming and did not move away. He pressed his palm to the side of her jaw, very gently, careful and intentional and unhurried. Her skin was warm despite the cold, and he could feel the edge of one tusk under his fingertips, smooth, cool, curving. "Tell me to stop," he said. "I will not," she said. He kissed her. She was still for one heartbeat, the kind of stillness that is not hesitation but recognition, and then she kissed him back with a thorough, unhurried intensity that made the mountain wind feel irrelevant. Her hands came up and held his face, careful and large and infinitely gentle, and the spiced tea went cold in his forgotten hand, and the lantern swung in the wind, and it was the best moment of his life up to that point and also the clearest. They stood there for a long time. When they parted, she looked at him with her forehead almost touching his, and her amber eyes were warm and quiet and a little undone. "You are going to be absolutely intolerable to fight with," she said softly. He laughed, and she felt it through her hands, which she had not moved. "I will try to be wrong sometimes. You will fail at that." He kissed her again, briefly and warmly, and she made a low sound against his mouth that he felt in his ribs. They did not tell anyone. There was no announcement, no public acknowledgement, and the discretion was not from shame but from instinct. What was between them was theirs, a private world of two that existed in the mornings on the well wall and the evenings at his patrol's end point, and the long conversations that no longer ended when the tea ran out. They moved through the market separately and met in the margins of it, and the thing between them was alive and warm and entirely their own. He began to know her in the way that you know someone when they have stopped withholding the smaller things. She had a precise memory for mountain geography and could name every trail above the snowline in a 50-mile range. She had strong opinions about the correct way to dry ginseng root, which she would defend at length with genuine passion. She was quietly funny in a way that only emerged when she trusted you. A dry wit delivered with a completely straight expression that would have fooled anyone not watching her eyes. She slept lightly, the way all mountain people sleep, and she was awake before dawn every morning without exception, which was how they had ended up sharing the well wall in the first place. He told her about the years before Thorne passed the militia work, which was unglamorous and often boring, and occasionally required him to stand between frightened people and something that wanted to hurt them, which was the part he was actually suited for. He told her about the loneliness of it, which he had never told anyone, because it seemed like a complaint he did not have the right to make when there were people with harder lives. She listened the way she listened to everything completely. "You have been alone for a long time," she said one evening, not as a pity but as an observation about something real. "Yes," he said, "I think I had gotten used to it." "Are you still used to it?" He looked at her. "No," he said, "not since September." She did not smile at that. She did something quieter than smiling. She reached across and took his hand and held it and looked away over the market rooftops at the cold stars over the peaks. He did not say anything else. He held her hand and looked at the same stars and felt the absence of the loneliness as a specific, identifiable sensation. The way you feel a pain go quiet after it has been there so long you had stopped hearing it. Aldrich Voss made his move on the 14th day of Reuben's new boots, which were good boots, mountain stock, exactly as Sheriff had said, with double-stitched calf leather and thick insulation, on a morning when the market was at its most crowded. Northern traders had come down with a resin shipment, and southern apothecary buyers had come up for the winter ginseng and dried herb market, and the main courtyard was packed with people and voices and the steam of breath in cold air. Derswick had arranged it, which Reuben understood afterward. He had placed 3 people in the crowd, not traders, not market regulars, men hired for the morning, and they had begun it with a thrown clot of frozen mud that struck Sheriff's stall board, followed by a shout of orc filth that was loud enough to carry over the market noise. Sheriff turned. She did not move toward the men. She stood at her stall with her hands at her sides, and her expression was composed and still in the way that a person is composed and still when they have survived this kind of thing before and know that moving toward it only gives it what it wants. But the crowd was not composed. The crowd, the mix of traders and buyers and handlers and idlers that filled a busy mountain market, shifted in the way crowds shift when someone calls out a familiar old fear. The 3 men were not alone anymore. Others joined in. Not all of them, not even most of them, but enough. the ones who had always had a story about orcs they were willing to believe on the shortest of notice. The shouts became a current, and the current had a direction. She did not move. Reuben saw that clearly. She was not going to move. She was going to stand exactly where she stood because this was her licensed stall and her earned market, and she was not going to be driven from it by hired men and fear. She was magnificent and she was alone and the crowd was closing in. He was at the east wall, 60 feet away. He ran, not running from, running to. He came through the crowd the way he had come through things before when the only option was to put his body between two forces and hold the line, not with grace but with determination and the absolute conviction that where he arrived was where he belonged. He slid through a gap between two broad-shouldered northern traders, shouldered past a spice merchant who had stepped the wrong direction, and arrived at Sharamp's stall front with his boots planted and his back to her and his face to the crowd. He had no sword drawn. He had nothing raised, no weapon out, nothing aggressive. He just stood there, a single guardsman in his garrison coat with his new mountain boots on the cobblestones between her and the crowd. The crowd faltered. Crowds are complicated things. They gain mass and momentum from assumption. The assumption that they are right and that no one will push back and that the target is isolated. A single point of counterpressure, if it is sufficiently calm and sufficiently committed, can break the assumption. Not always. But sometimes. This is a licensed market stall, Reuben said. His voice was not loud, but it was clear. Mountain air carries. This trader has operated here for 3 years under legal charter. What is happening right now is unlawful harassment of a licensed market member, and it falls under the garrison's mandate to stop. One of the hired men, a heavy-set fellow near the front, said, "She's an orc. She is a licensed trader of the Thornpass Monastery market," Reuben said. "The same as every other licensed trader in this courtyard. Now." He looked at the man, and then at the men beside him, and then at the wider crowd, making sure they all understood he was seeing them and would remember them. "Is there someone here with a legitimate complaint about this specific stall, filed through the market charter's complaint procedure? Because that is the proper process." Silence. "Then I am asking everyone to step back." They stepped back. Not all at once, not cheerfully, but the current reversed and the crowd dispersed back into a market, and the 3 hired men at the front melted away into it because there was nothing to stay for. Reuben stood where he was until the last of them had gone. Then he turned around. She was looking at him. She had not moved from her spot behind the stall. Her amber eyes were very bright, and her jaw was set hard, and her hands were pressed flat on the trestle table, and he could see that she was working through it the way you work through something that has hit you in a place you have spent a long time protecting. He walked around the side of the stall to her. He did not ask if she was all right, because she was Sharamph Grimtusk and she would say yes regardless, and the answer was not actually the point. He took her hand. Both hands. He held them in both of his and she let him, and for a moment she closed her eyes. "He was watching," she said quietly. "Voss, he was at the edge of the courtyard. I know. I saw him. He wanted that to happen. He needed witnesses to an incident, me being removed or me reacting. Either one would have served him. Neither of those things happened." She opened her eyes. She looked at him from very close and he could see the bright in her eyes was not anger, or not only anger. "You could lose your contract for this. I applied the charter correctly. I have it memorized. That is not what I meant." He knew it was not what she meant. "I know," he said. "It still does not change anything." She looked at him for a long time. Something moved through her expression that he had not seen there before, something deep and certain and decided, as if she was not just feeling something but recognizing it and naming it and accepting it all at once. She turned their joined hands over and pressed the back of his hand to the side of her jaw, mirroring what he had done to her weeks ago, and the gesture was so deliberate and so private that it felt like a language they had invented for themselves. "You are mine," she said softly. It was not a demand. It was an observation about something she had determined to be true. "Yes," he said, "I have been for a while now." Aldrich Voss came to find them that afternoon, not in the market, not in public, but at the monastery's outer gate, with Derswick and his private secretary. He was impeccably dressed and very controlled, and he told Reuben that his interference in a market matter had been noted and that the garrison contract review would reflect it. He said it without any of the heat of a man who has lost. He said it as a man who has more cards to play. Reuben said, "I want to be sure I understand. Are you telling me that because you believe I overstepped, or because you want to deter me from doing it again?" Voss looked at him with the particular expression of a man who is not used to being asked questions that make his meaning explicit. "Does the distinction matter? It does to me. If I overstepped, I'd like to know where, and I'll review my understanding of the garrison's mandate." He paused. "If you are trying to deter me, you should know that won't work." Derswick, beside Voss, made a small noise. Voss looked at Reuben for a long moment. Something passed through his polished face, not doubt, not exactly, but a reassessment. "You are very confident for a junior guardsman." "I am not confident," Reuben said. "I am just clear about what I am willing to do." Voss left. Derswick left behind him. Reuben went back to his patrol and completed it without incident, and tried not to think about how many ways Aldrich Voss still had to make things difficult. Voss's next move surprised him, because it was smart. He did not go after Sharamp's license directly. He went after the governance board itself. Specifically, he challenged the validity of the emergency board meeting that had affirmed the charter's complaint procedure, on the technical grounds that the record-keeping had been handled by Brother Cale's assistant rather than a full charter clerk. The challenge was filed with the regional magistrate in the lowland town of Arnfell, 2 days' ride down the pass, and it had enough procedural merit to require a formal response. It bought him time, which was what he needed. If the board meeting was invalidated, all its decisions were voided, including the procedural protections, and a new meeting, called under his chairship, would have a very different agenda. Reuben took the problem apart carefully. Over 2 evenings at the Market's Traders' Tavern with a pint of dark beer, he nursed across both sessions, his notebook open and the charter beside it. He found the response in the appendix again, the same appendix that had given him the community fund. The old Greyville monks had apparently anticipated most forms of administrative interference, probably because they had experienced them all personally during the political upheavals of their era, and they had built redundancies into the charter that were almost excessive in their thoroughness. He found an attestation clause. Any market member who had been present at a meeting could individually attest, in a signed statement before a witness, that the meeting had occurred and been properly conducted. 7 individual attestations constituted a valid record regardless of who had held the pen. He went to each board member and each market member who had been present. He collected 7 signed attestations in 2 days. He sent them with a paid courier to Arnfell before Voss could learn they were coming. The challenge was dismissed a week later. The notification came back up the pass road pinned to a supply wagon's cargo manifest, and Reuben found it when he helped the wagon driver unload at the market gate, and he stood in the cold reading it twice, and then allowed himself a small, private moment of profound satisfaction. He brought it to Sharamph that evening. She read it once, set it down, and then she crossed to him and kissed him with a warmth and thoroughness that made the document crumple slightly in his hand. "You are remarkable," she said, her forehead against his temple. "I just read carefully," he said. "No," she said quietly. "That is not what makes you remarkable." They were together in the way that felt like they had always been together, comfortable and lit from inside with something he had no prior experience of and no adequate vocabulary for. He knew that what he felt for her was not a small thing. It was the largest thing in his landscape, and it had been since around the 2nd or 3rd morning on the well wall, and the honesty of it had stopped frightening him. He did not understand why she had chosen him, specifically. He was not grand or powerful or impressive by any conventional measurement. He was a junior guardsman with modest wages and valley boots. But she had, and she kept choosing him, every morning and every evening and every time the world gave her a reason to reconsider, and she did not take it. He was learning to accept that this was how it was. That a woman this remarkable wanted him, not in spite of who he was but because of it, because he was steady and honest and put his feet in the ground when the ground needed holding. He was learning to stop asking why and simply receive it, the way you receive something you have not expected and did not know you needed and cannot now imagine being without. On a cold, clear night when the stars above the gravels were brilliant and exact, and the frost was thick on the monastery stones, they were together in the alcove near the north wing, where a stone bench sat sheltered from the wind by the old curved wall, and she was telling him about the Grimtus clan's winter fire ritual, a long night of story and song that went from dusk to dawn, her grandmother's voice carrying over the fire to the children gathered around it. And her voice when she talked about her grandmother was a different voice from the one she used in the market, softer and less guarded. And he was watching her, and had been for some time when she paused and turned to him. "You are not listening," she said. "I am," he said. "I am listening to the way you talk about her." She looked at him. He could see the softness under the composure, the part of her that had been very carefully kept from most people and was, with him, increasingly present. "She would have liked you," she said quietly. She believed that real strength was the kind that knows when to be gentle. He took her hand. "I think she sounds extraordinary." She was. She looked at their joined hands. "I miss her." "How long ago?" 4 years. I was 22. She paused. "I came to Thornpass the year after, when I was deciding what to do with the rest of my life and did not want to stay in the clan range and be sad in the places we had been together." He understood this completely. The way you understand something about another person that they have not said in so many words. He said nothing, because understanding sometimes expressed itself better in silence than in speech, and she knew it, and he knew she knew it. She turned to him in the dark, and the starlight was doing what it does to faces when people are close together and everything else has gone quiet, and she looked at him for a long time. "I want to stay," she said softly. "I have not wanted to stay somewhere in 4 years." He raised his hand and pressed it to her face, the same gesture, repeated, belonging to them now. "Then stay," he said. She kissed him this time, leading with it, and there was a warmth and a certainty to it that was different from before, deeper, the kind of kiss between people who have stopped wondering and started knowing. He kissed her back with everything he had, which was considerable, and she made a sound against him that was somewhere between content and hungry, and the frost on the monastery stones glittered under the brilliant stars above the gravels, and none of it mattered except her. They were warm in the wind-sheltered alcove for a long time. The final confrontation with Aldrich Voss came in the form of a public declaration, posted at the market's main gate on a gray morning 10 days later. It was written in formal language on high-quality paper with the Voss family seal, and it announced that in his capacity as governance board chair, a capacity still contested but currently unresolved by the regional magistrate, he was convening an emergency session in 3 days to address ongoing concerns about the composition and conduct of the current licensed trader population. It was carefully worded to avoid naming her directly. It named the category, non-human licensed traders, and their compatibility with the market's character and security. The wording was chosen because Voss knew the direct approach had failed. He was going to try to make the room do it for him. Reuben read the declaration twice at the gate. He went to find Sharamph, who had also read it and was standing at her stall with her hands flat on the trestle table and her jaw set. 3 days, she said. Yes. We don't have enough on the board to block it cleanly. 2 of the 4 members are still uncertain. They don't want to antagonize Voss if he ends up confirmed as chair. Reuben thought about this for a moment. We don't need to block it at the board level. We need to make the session itself untenable. If the case against you cannot be made on its merits, if there is no actual documented complaint, no credible witness, no formal grounds, then whatever Voss pushes through at that session is immediately challengeable on appeal. Appeal takes months. Yes, he said. But it protects the licenses in the meantime, and if we can document that the session itself was procedurally improper, the appeal has a strong case. She looked at him. You have thought about this. I have been thinking about this since the declaration went up this morning. She was quiet for a moment. Then, what do you need? They spent the next 3 days in what he would later describe to himself as the most organized and relentless piece of work he had ever participated in. They went through every licensed orc trader's records, license dates, tax payments, complaint histories, market participation logs, and prepared a complete documentation package for each one. Not because the records were weak, because they were strong, and the strength needed to be visible and organized and immediately available when the session began. They recruited Turris the mapmaker and Alcourt the grain factor and Brother Kale, who turned out to have a remarkably aggressive understanding of the charter for a monk, and they prepared responses to every argument Voss might reasonably make. On the night before the session, Reuben sat with Sharamph in the trader's tavern with the documentation spread across the table between them, and they went through it one last time. When they were finished, she gathered the papers and rolled them carefully and looked at him across the table with the lamp between them making gold of everything. Whatever happens tomorrow, she said. Whatever happens tomorrow, he agreed. She reached across and took his hand and held it. I am not afraid, she said, not bravado, just fact. I know, he said. Neither am I. She looked at him and something moved in her expression, some private shift, the kind that happens when a feeling becomes a decision. I want to tell you something else, she said quietly. He waited. In my clan's way, when an orc woman has decided, when she has chosen a man as hers, there is a word for it, not a human word. There is no good translation. She paused. The closest is the one who is worth keeping. He said nothing. His chest was very full. I decided some time ago, she said. I have been deciding it again every day since. He turned his hand under hers so their palms were together. I have been decided since early autumn, he said quietly. I just did not have the right word for it. She smiled at him, the full smile, the extraordinary one, and held his hand on the tavern table while the lamp burned between them. The session was held in the monastery's convening hall, which was full. Aldrich Voss had arranged for observers, traders, market regulars, a handful of lowlanders who had come up with his retinue. He sat at the head of the board table with his secretary and Derswick, and he ran the proceedings with the smooth efficiency of a man who had rehearsed this and expected it to go quickly. It did not go quickly. Reuben presented the documentation for each orc trader's license, one by one, clearly and without flourish, citing the charter section for each point, responding to every question with a specific reference. Sharamph sat at the end of the table and said nothing, which was exactly right, because she did not need to say anything. The record spoke with the precision of 3 years of impeccable market conduct and not a single filed complaint. The board members asked questions. Reuben answered them. Alcourt and Turris asked their own questions that were precisely timed to redirect the conversation, when Voss tried to steer it toward generalities rather than evidence. Voss tried 4 different angles. Each one ran into a charter section. He was elegant and persuasive and furious underneath, and at the end of 2 hours he had nothing that could be acted upon without creating an appeal case so strong it would survive any regional magistrate. He called a procedural recess. During it, Reuben watched him confer with Derswick in the corner, and he could see the shape of the conversation, the ledger of options being reviewed and found short. When they resumed, Voss made one final attempt. He moved to suspend all licenses pending a comprehensive market review to be conducted under his authority as chair. He made the motion. He asked for seconds. Alcourt declined. Turris declined. Of the 2 uncertain board members, one, a timber merchant named Goss, who had been quiet the whole session, said, "This motion lacks procedural merit," and did not second it. The other followed him. The motion died without a second. Voss sat in his chair for a moment. Then he stood, gathered his papers, and walked out of the convening hall with Derswick at his heels and his secretary struggling to keep up. The door did not slam, because he was too controlled for that, but the silence he left behind him said everything a slammed door would have. The observers filed out. The board members gathered their things with the particular quiet of people who have watched something end and are not yet sure what comes after. Reuben was at the table collecting the documentation rolls when he felt her beside him, and he turned, and she was there. "It is done," she said. "It is done," he agreed. "He still holds the chairship claim. That has to resolve in Arnfell, but without a revocation on record and without a successful session motion, there is nothing to enforce against you." "He will not come back," she said. "Men like him do not invest more in a failed game. He will find a different angle elsewhere." He thought she was right. He hoped she was right. "Then it is done," he said again, and this time it felt like something landing rather than something being concluded. She looked at him. He looked at her. Brother Cale was still at the table 10 feet away reading something. Alcourt had stopped near the door to speak to Turris. They were not alone, not exactly, and it did not matter. She kissed him in the convening hall of the old monastery with witnesses present, both hands on his face, thorough and certain, and not particularly concerned with who was watching. And he kissed her back with his hands at her waist, and the documentation rolls tucked under one arm. And he heard Alcourt make a small surprised sound near the door that was followed by Turris shushing him. When they parted, her forehead was against his temple, and she was smiling, not the small, private smile of the well wall, but the full one, unreserved, and it was the most beautiful thing in the Greyville range. "Come," she said quietly. "I want to show you something." She took him to the east side of the monastery, where the old courtyard opened onto a stone overlook above the pass, and the full sweep of the Greyville range was visible from one horizon to the other, the northern peaks white with permanent snow, the pass road cutting south between them toward the river valley, the sky above it all vast and steel gray, and lit from within with the particular cold light of a mountain winter afternoon. It was one of the most extraordinary views he had ever stood inside of. "My grandmother showed me this view," she said. "The first winter she brought me up to Thornpass with her to trade. I was 12. She paused. She said the pass was a threshold. That things that crossed it carried a weight, whether goods, people, and that the threshold itself was alive in some old way that the monks had built around rather than over." He stood beside her and looked at the threshold. "I want to stay here," she said, "with you, in Thornpass. I want to keep my stall and expand the root I harvest from and come back every evening to the same place." She paused. "That is not something I have wanted to be possible before." "It is possible," he said. She turned to look at him. "Will you stay? I know Varn. I will speak with Varn. And if Varn says no, I will find another way to be useful to this market. There is no shortage of work at the top of a mountain pass." He held her gaze. "I am not going anywhere." She looked at him for a long moment with the view at her back, the full sweep of the Greyville range framing her, and he thought he had never seen anything as right as this. There was something else that needed to happen. He had understood this, distantly, since the night in the tavern when she had told him about the Grimtusk word for chosen. He had been thinking about it in the days since, which is to say he had been thinking about it constantly and quietly in the way he thought about things that mattered very much. He wanted to say it directly. He wanted to say, "I love you and I want this and I want it to be real in every way it can be." But he understood from everything she had told him about her clan's way, the word for chosen, the grandmother's voice over the winter fire, the things an orc woman did when she had decided that the words might not be the right form, that there might be a different form. He said, "Tell me about your clan's right for choosing." She looked at him. Her expression changed. "The nothing," she said carefully. "It is an old word, old even for orcs." She was watching his face. "It is what the woman does when she has decided, when she wants to make it witnessed." "What does she do?" She was quiet for a moment. The mountain wind moved through the courtyard, and the lanterns on the monastery wall swung. "She kneels," she said, "before her chosen, in the presence of witnesses who know them both. She says the words." She paused, "And the one who is chosen answers, or does not." He looked at her and she was looking at him, and there was a particular quality to the attention between them that was the complete version of everything the mornings on the well wall had been building toward. "Who would need to witness it?" he said. She searched his face for a long moment. "You understand what you are asking about?" "Yes," he said. "It is not a small thing. I know. If it is done, it is permanent. It is not a human contract that a magistrate can dissolve. It is." She stopped, started again. "It is mine and yours forever." "I know," he said again. "I want it." Her amber eyes were very bright. The steel-gray sky was above them and the range was around them, and she was looking at him as though she was still, after all this time and all these mornings, slightly astonished to find him exactly where he always was standing in his ground, meaning exactly what he said. "Reuben," she said softly. "Sheriff," he said. She breathed out. It was not a laugh exactly, but it had the shape of one, the sound of something releasing, something that had been held for a long time. "All right," she said. "We will need witnesses." They gathered them 2 evenings later. It was a small gathering and a deliberate one. Alcourt, Turris, Brother Kale, and 3 of the 6 other orc traders who had been part of everything, people who knew them both, who had watched what they built, who understood what was being witnessed. They assembled in the courtyard by the monastery well at the hour before the evening market closed, when the torchlight was warm against the stone, and the cold was clean, and the stars were beginning in the east. Reuben stood at the center of it, and he was wearing his garrison coat and his good mountain boots, and he was aware, with unusual clarity, that this was the most important moment of his 24 years of living, and he was not afraid of it. There was no preamble. She came forward from the small group, and she walked to him with the certain, deliberate stride that was entirely hers, and she looked at him for one clear moment with those amber eyes. And then she knelt. The sound of it, the shift of her boots on the monastery cobblestones, the rustle of her cedar leather as she settled was very small against the mountain wind. She knelt with her hands open on her thighs, her back straight, her eyes raised to him, her tusks catching the torchlight in 2 pale curves. She was not small in this position. She was not diminished. She was wholly herself, wholly present, offering something freely that she had guarded for a very long time. He looked down at her. Around them, the witnesses were quiet. The torches moved in the wind. She spoke in the old orc words, first low and rhythmic and old in the way that things are old when they carry generations inside them. And then she gave him the human meaning, because this was between both of them and she wanted him to have both. She said, "I see you. I have seen you from the beginning. You are steady when the ground shakes, and you are gentle when gentleness is the harder thing, and you are mine in the way that the mountain belongs to the sky, not by taking but by belonging. I am Sheriff Grimtusk, and I name you the one who is worth keeping, and I kneel here before witnesses because I want the world to know that I chose you, that I choose you now, and that I will choose you again every day that follows this one." He heard it entirely, every word. He did not speak the formal response immediately, because he was 24 years old and feeling something he had no practice with, the particular shock of being fully seen and fully wanted by someone extraordinary, landing all at once after months of building. He breathed through it. He let it settle. And then he reached down and took her hands in both of his and drew her to her feet, and she rose, and they were face to face in the torchlight. He said, "I have been alone for a long time, and I had made peace with it. And then you picked up a mugger by the scruff of his coat in an alley and looked at me as though I was something worth evaluating, and I have been yours since that night. I am Reuben Reed, and I am steady because I learned how to be, and I am gentle because I choose to be, and I am whatever you need me to be because that is who I am with you. I name myself yours. I will be yours in every way and in every season, and I am not going anywhere." Her eyes were bright. She raised one hand to the side of his face, large and careful and infinitely warm. Around them, Alcourt was making the small, involuntary sound of a man trying not to become visibly emotional and failing. Turris was smiling. The 3 orc traders were still, as witnesses are still at the moment of witnessing. Brother Kale had his hands folded and his expression at peace. She kissed him, not briefly. with thoroughness and warmth and the specific certainty of a woman who has chosen and is glad of it. He kissed her back with the same. When they parted, she looked at him, and the smile that had been building since that first alley night was fully present, complete, nothing held back. "Your boots," she said softly, "are finally adequate." He laughed. He pulled her to him, and she let herself be pulled, and they stood in the monastery courtyard with the witnesses around them and the mountain wind in the torches, and the stars coming out one by one above the Grayville peaks. He thought of the alley and the lantern and the shape moving in the dark. He thought of the mornings on the well wall and the cold tea and the ginseng and the charter's appendix, and the first time she had pressed her hand to his wrist, and the way the mountain looked from the overlook with her beside it. He thought of the long season of mornings and evenings that had built this moment piece by careful piece, and he held her in the torchlit courtyard and felt the loneliness of 24 years quietly finish. She pressed her face to the side of his head. Her tusks were against his jaw, cool and smooth and curved, the same tusks that had caught the lantern light in the alley and that he had touched in the dark of the monastery gate and that he had never, not once, been afraid of. "I should tell you something," he said quietly. "Tell me," she said. "When you first sat beside me on the wall that morning, I was already gone. I was already entirely lost." She made a low sound against him, fond and warm. "I know," she said. "You are terrible at hiding things." He laughed again, and she felt it, and she held him more tightly, and the mountain held them both. The Thornpass market continued to operate through the winter, busy and bright and lit at night by its rows of swinging lanterns. Aldrich Voss's chairship claim was still working its way through the regional magistrate's process in Arnfell. These things moved slowly by design but without a completed session motion, and with the Orc trader's licenses firmly documented and defended, there was nothing to enforce. His retinue left Thornpass within the week. Derswick went with them. The market returned to the steady rhythms that markets return to when the disruption passes, and the work reasserts itself. Captain Varn, in a meeting that was shorter than Reuben had expected, reviewed the charter citation records from the attempted harassment incident and said nothing for a long time, and then said that Reuben's application of the garrison's mandate had been technically correct, and that his contract review would reflect sound judgment. He did not say it warmly. He said it the way a sour man says something true that he has decided he might as well acknowledge. It was enough. Grath the wool merchant, free of his Voss debt, expanded his stall into the east wing and became, over the course of the winter, a quiet and consistent supporter of the market charter's protections. He stopped Reuben once on his morning patrol and said, simply, "Thank you," in the way of a man who has been given more than he deserved and knows it. Sharamp's ginseng stall expanded into dried mountain herbs and tinctures, adding to the roster of apothecary buyers who made the trip up the pass specifically for her stock. She was methodical and meticulous about inventory, and her records were always perfect, and she was known to every market vendor by name and to most of them by something closer to respect. She was also, increasingly and visibly, known as the woman who was with Reuben Reed, which he gathered from the way people's eyes moved between them when they were in the market together. He did not mind this at all. He was known, he understood, as the guardsman who had planted his feet between a crowd and her that morning in the courtyard, which was how he preferred to be known about something. In the evenings after the market closed, they were together at the old stone bench in the sheltered alcove, or in the trader's tavern with their tea, and sometimes a shared plate of whatever the kitchen had made, or walking the pass road to the overlook where the full range was visible, and the sky was enormous overhead. She told him about the Grimtusk clan, about the northern peaks, about trails that went above the snowline to places where only the mountain goats and the orcs who knew the secret paths could reach. He told her about Caldford, about his father's cobbler shop, about the river fogs and his two sisters, and about the particular quality of his own loneliness before Thornpass, which he was only now able to describe clearly because he could see it behind him. He had been a decent, hard-working, quietly brave and ordinary man, and he had been overlooked for most of his life without quite knowing it. And then a remarkable woman had sat beside him on a cold stone wall and evaluated him and decided he was worth keeping. And she had been right, and he was grateful for it every morning. On the morning after the witnessing, when the world had resumed its normal pace, and the market was opening and the cold was sharp, and the mountain wind was doing its usual work on the eastern stalls, he came off his shift change with his barley tea and sat on the well wall, and she came to him before he had taken his first sip, and she sat beside him in the usual place. Not a foot of space between them now, no distance at all, close enough that her arm was warm against his. And she looked out at the morning market with the same composed, alert expression she brought to everything. He sipped his tea. She said, "There is a trail above the western ridge that leads to a ginseng field I have not harvested in 2 seasons. I want to go up next week if the weather holds." "I can get the day off," he said. She glanced at him. "The trail is steep." "I have good boots now." She looked at his boots. She looked at his face. The small, pleased lift at the corner of her mouth arrived and stayed. "Yes," she said, "you do." They sat on the wall together in the cold morning light, surrounded by the sounds of the Thornpass market waking up vendors calling, a mule lodging its eternal complaint, the creak of stall shutters, the smell of hot barley and spiced smoke. And he held his tea and she held her own, and the Grayville peaks were enormous above them. And the pass road cut south toward the river valley where he had come from and north toward the snowline where she had grown up, and between them at the top of the world. The threshold was alive in the old way. He was not going anywhere. She was not going anywhere. They were warm in the mountain cold, and they were not alone, and that was the whole of it, and it was more than enough. It was everything.